Morning, sisters and brothers. Brother William here, with your Sunday sermon. Today I want to talk about history and the positive and negative impact that religion has on it. Now, I could talk about crusades and intifada, but I'm pretty sure you already have your own opinions on that. The points I want to raise are probably better served if you're less familiar with the popular narrative and all the modern baggage that comes with it. I grew up in the Hebrides. They're a wonderful, mystical set of misty islands. They've got a mysterious past that stretches back to before when the pharaohs raised their first pyramids. This is Clachan Chalanish. It's one of a large number of megalithic sites that you can find around the area of Chalanish village in Lewis. Their original purpose is lost to us. Our interpretation of them depends very much on whatever happens to be our current popular belief. When they first came to the attention of the English-speaking world in the 1680s, they were assumed to be of religious significance. In the 1970s, when I first saw them, they were believed to have served as some kind of cosmic calendar, allowing their builders to pace the seasons for practical and ritualistic purposes. Today's New Agers believe that they've got tremendous spiritual value. But hey, for all we know, they might have been set in place to spend the last of that year's arts budget. Spiritualism, with Wicca and feminism, are probably Britain's fastest growing 21st century religions. When I visited the Stones in August, I came across a woman who probably practices all three. What I seen the look she gave me. She was literally hugging the stones. She was listening to them. She was running her hands all over them. She was obviously having some deep and meaningful experience. How dare I appear with my digital camera and ruin the occasion? But this is the thing about religion. See, there's a passage in the Old Testament that records an old man getting stoned to death for failing to observe someone else's religious practices. Yeah, in that case it was gathering sticks on the Sabbath. To the devout, their experience transcends everybody else's rights, even when that experience comes at somebody else's expense. Take the Stones. John Marsden, who was an ancestor of mine, first wrote about them in English. Now, they were restored and they were reseated by modern Hebrideans, again with some of my ancestors being involved. I'm a fairly regular visitor, so my tourist dollars, that's to say the handful of sovereigns that I chuck in at the visitor centre every time I'm up there, they help keep the land maintained and the stones upright. So I've got a small stake in these ancient treasures. I've got a much greater right to be there in the land of my ancestors than some plummy-voiced English hippie woman. She wouldn't even have heard of the ruin, much less have got the chance to molest them, if it wasn't for me and a long line of men just like me. But while I want to share this ancient wonder with the whole world, she resents my presence almost as much as she resents my old pentax. Another ruin, much more modern this time, is Duncarloway. It's a broch that was built by the ancient Picts round about the 1st century for purposes unknown. Now, it makes a decent castle. Much of the damage that you can see done to it was inflicted in a battle between the Macaulays and the Morrisons in medieval times. Again though, the Picts are lost to history. It might not have been a castle, it might just have been that they preferred to live in brochs. The reason the Picts are lost is because my people and their many rivals came to the Hebrides. It wasn't all bad. At first the influx of foreign settlers was benign. Norsemen like the Nicholsons intermarried with Scots settlers and the Pictish natives. Eventually they became the MacNichol clan. The islands were a culturally diverse and enlightened part of the world during the darkest years of the Dark Ages. The Celtic Church flourished. It preserved the knowledge of the Greeks here in the West, as well as a lot of more obviously religious texts. But things changed drastically in the 8th century. Christian missionaries arrived in Scandinavia. Now, their conflict with the existing pagan beliefs was bloody and brutal. Our history seen through Christian eyes is a long line of selfless martyrs and saints leading the infidels to their eventual salvation. Hallelujah. We don't get to hear the pagan side. We don't get to hear the pagan side because they're extinct. Go draw your own conclusions. Scandinavia was rich in resources. They had manpower, timber, tar and iron. When the pagans retaliated, they raided Christian monasteries. But here's the thing, they came home rich. Two things immediately occurred to them. The first was how wealthy the Christian churches were. There's a great incentive to raid straight there. The second was how successfully the Christians had tamed the warring pagan tribes that they'd converted. The Christian West was all but defenceless. With an overborne population and enough resources to equip a war fleet, they did precisely what their enraged priesthood demanded. Asatru was always a religion of sacrifice. Now other people and other cultures could help be given as that sacrifice. Now the peaceful, enlightened Celtic Church didn't last long, and nor did what remained of the pagan Picts. Pretty soon the Norse began to establish outposts in the west, closer to the targets, and in time those became settlements, and then colonies, and then kingdoms in their own right. The modern churches are fairly reticent about their part in resisting these invaders, quite possibly because they didn't bother. In under 4 centuries the Norse had become Christians, and they lived peacefully alongside their Celtic neighbours. But not because they'd all suddenly become peace-loving happy clappers. The Norse that invaded Britain were utter bastards. Their economy was based on a large slave class. The real advantage of living in the British Isles was easy access to slave populations. Now Viking may be a noun or it may be a verb, but Sommerled, summer wanderer, was what these murderous rapists used when they rounded Cape Wrath. Their sagas are full of descriptions of noble battles and great wars, but the reality was that they were big, physically fit, well-fed, superbly equipped professional warriors. They spent their time butchering half-starved and ill-equipped peasants. They stole slaves, preferably young teenagers. No man will willingly see his children taken, so they had to be eliminated. Nobles and other leaders were tortured to death. Look up Blood Eagle if you want a sleepless night tonight. Lesser men were just murdered. Of course that left a bit of a dearth of males to help grow the next crop of slaves, so they set about raping every woman of childbearing age. It's not quite Hagar when you look at it that way. The trouble was that this kind of behaviour breeds a kind of desperation into your enemies. The Vikings' reign of terror didn't end with the Battle of Largs, nor with Stamford Bridge. These are lovely, just so stories that history teachers can use to wrap up the ugliest, most brutal chapter of Britain's recent history. You see, there's no need to tell the tweenies that they're descended from murderers, rapists and slavers, or suggest to them that they're equally descended from their terrified victims. You know, better just to bow before the ancient kings who beat the Vikings out, eh? Except that the king that really drove them out wasn't a Scot, and he wasn't a Saxon, and it wasn't all done and dusted in one battle. There was a young partisan Gael by the name of Siol Mhor. He was one of the Siol Goraidh. He battered the invaders out of his territory in Argyll and Morven, but then something strange happened. The young man fell for a Norse princess, Ragnhilda Olafsdottir. When they married, he became allied to the King of Man, a tremendously powerful Norse king who controlled the entire Irish Sea. Now poor old Olaf, he took an axe to the head from a fellow Norseman. Par for the course for the Norse. But Solly wasn't having that. The rest was just a brutal, poorly recorded history. Sorley took a fleet out to meet his king's killer. He invaded the Isle of Man. He chased down the murderer's kin in Galloway. Basically, he put every fucker involved to the sword. And at the end of it, he was the absolute ruler of a territory that stretched from Cape Wrath all the way down to the Viking city of Dublin. Sorley died at a grand old age. Some say that he died in battle against the Scots. Others say that he was ambushed at sea by the Vikings. Some say he died by an assassin's hand, but the Vikings never returned. Sorley's descendants and their allies were an entirely new race, and they were a people that had no place for summer wanderers. It's said that his people sheltered the Bruce from the Normans. It's a fact that his grandson's grandson, Angus Odd MacDonald, led the charge that broke Edward's army at Bannockburn. That gave painful birth to Scotland and England in one bloody night's slaughter. But again, you probably wouldn't get much about Angus Odd MacDonald in your history lessons. Not in my country anyway. My people were born out of this train wreck. Without it, I wouldn't be here. Right inside of me lives that brutal Viking. But so does the valiant partisan Gael. There's the bonny Scandinavian settler girls, and there's the brutalised native slaves. Every one of them right here, beating in my veins. Would I change that, if I could? Yeah, I'd fucking change it. The two religions that were baying at the sidelines, filling weak minds with outrageous lies, and they turned every place a dragon or a canard could reach into a living hell for 300 years. There was another way. A peaceful partnership between the diverse cultures and races. Before religion came into the picture, they were getting along just fine. If religion hadn't appeared, we might have kept some of the precious knowledge that the Picts had to pass down to us from antiquity. We might have had a clue who put up the stones and why they did it. Instead, when we think of Hebrideans, you think of Shakespeare's gallow glasses. That's an anglicised version of Galachach. Or you think of Highland soldiers, all kilts and bayonets. Those first Norse settlers were explorers. They brought fascinating advances in shipbuilding. I mean, who'd have thought you could build a boat out of wood and iron? Amazing. They brought access to Scandinavian resources, Scandinavian artefacts, Scandinavian tools and skills. They needed land, but there was plenty of land to spare. They profited from the skills of Gaelic navigators. They were shown the land that they came to call Iceland, and they were told about the continent that led on the other side of it. They gained access through the Gaels to European trade. But a century later, that kin turned up, and they were the devil incarnate. There is good in religion. The knowledge that the Greeks and the Romans passed on to us would have been lost if it wasn't for those early, peaceful Christian monks and the scholars that lived in Islay and the little islands beyond it. But there's a darker side to it as well. The Crusades, or Jihad, or the Viking, it's a feature of almost every mainstream religion. We've got a clear propensity to believe in gods. It's a powerful belief that can be turned into a campaign of the vilest acts imaginable with only a little provocation. So be very wary when someone claims that they're doing God's work, people. The chances are they're doing quite the reverse. Here endeth the sermon. If you're interested in Somhairle Mhor, for God's sake don't go to Wikipedia. There's a few links below. And yet you didn't mishear me. I do take it on faith that the Gaels took part in transatlantic voyages of exploration, well, at least as far as Iceland. Perhaps I'll go into that in a little more detail sometime. Still, until then, laters guys.